stuff around the side that I'm tracing through? That's all the white matter. The white matter is divided into structures called fununculi. And the fununculi are named pretty logically. This is the front of the spinal cord right here. So this is the anterior furunculus. This is the side of the spinal cord right here. So it's the lateral furunculus. This is the back of the spinal cord. So it's the posterior furunculus. So anterior at the front, lateral at the side, posterior at the back. What was that big gap in the middle of my brain that I said I could wedge my fingers into? Longitudinal fissure, right. You're close. And if we come up to the front here, you'll see that right at the front, there's similarly a very large gap. See that significant wedge in there? Kind of looks like we've cross-sectioned some butt cheeks or something like that. Well, that big crack, there's a lot of butts in this slide, isn't there? All right, that big crack is our anterior median fissure. So this big incision that goes all the way in, that's the anterior median fissure. What did we call a small little valley? Sulcus. And if I go to the back, right there, at the top of the slide, that little tiny valley I'm sitting in there, that's the posterior median sulcus. So posterior median sulcus, at the back and small, anterior median fissure, at the front and very, very large.
Is there a way to tell the front from the back?
The front has the fissure. Does that make sense? If I show you the whole thing, it's pretty obvious which is the back, because the back has the spinous processes and the front has the body. But remember, your other model doesn't have the bone around it, so you have to remember the front has the fissure. All right, so that gets us through that. And now we're into the gray matter. Unfortunately, the gray matter is depicted as being brown. You see the thing that I think looks like a butterfly here? I said rockin'.
I said pocket, like put it in your pocket.
Oh, sorry. So this is a brown butterfly here. Does everyone see it? That's your gray matter. The butterflies are divided into horns. So we have an anterior horn at the front, a lateral horn at the side, and a posterior horn at the back. Pretty straightforward. So anterior horn at the front, lateral horn at the side, posterior horn at the back. Connecting the two wings of the butterfly, this little band that runs across is the gray commissure. And the hole right in the middle is the central canal. That little black dot right in the middle of the gray commissure, that hole is our central canal. Okay, the next part gets a little bit messy here. You guys looked at your spinal cord and cross-section last week, right? Your slide?
I wasn't
Yep.
here.
All right, most people did. So when you looked at the spinal cord and cross-section, you remember the dorsal roots coming off the back of the and leading to the dorsal root ganglia where you had all the cell bodies of the unipolar neurons? Yeah. That's what was in the slide. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. So if I look at this model here, here's my spinal cord right in the middle. Do you see these yellow strings coming off the front of the spinal cord? Those are the ventral roots. So they're at the front. You see the yellow strings coming off the back of the spinal cord? Those are the dorsal roots. And that's actually what you were looking at in that slide last week. If you follow the dorsal roots along, you eventually get to this swelling. See the big swelling? I'm running the pen over here. And that big swelling is your dorsal root ganglia. If I keep following the dorsal root ganglia, it eventually branches. And some of it goes backwards to form the dorsal ramus, and some of it comes forward to form the ventral ramus. So if I show you while holding it, I know it's small, but sometimes getting all the perspective helps. Here's your spinal cord. Ventral roots are coming off the front, and dorsal roots are coming off the back. The dorsal roots run to this swelling right here, which is the dorsal root ganglia. And if we follow it, it then leads to the dorsal ramus going backwards, and the ventral ramus coming forwards. Does Does that hurt? Does that work? Is it big enough?
When we write it on the test, do we have to say ventral ramus of spinal?
Multiple choice. You won't have to write anything.
You told us to learn it like we were.
Right, well, yeah, but I mean, if you say, we won't trick you like that. Like, she's not going to do spelling tricks or incomplete word tricks. Like, if you just remember dorsal ramus and ventral ramus, you'll be fine.
Okay.
Can everyone see this band coming forward here? Is it big enough you can see it without the camera? This band coming forward is called the ramus communicans. And the ramus communicans leads to this structure right here, which is the sympathetic chain ganglia. Remember, I've now turned it sideways.
Where's that?
This is the ramus communicans coming across, and this swelling on the front of the vertebrae is the sympathetic chain ganglia. So if you're looking at me in this angle, you'd be looking at my sympathetic chain ganglia. If I turned my head, you'd see all these features, but from the front, you see the sympathetic chain ganglia. And we're going to see them again when we do the posters on the, or the model, the poster of nerves over there. All right, we get this back under here, and now we get back into these maters again that we talked about. You see this white membrane I'm touching right here, way at the back, and it has what looks like a G but is really a 9? That's the dura mater. I'm touching the dura mater. Now, do you see just below the dura mater that skinny brown line? That skinny brown line is actually a space called the subdural space. And the white just on the other side of it, so the white that the tip of my pen is hanging over right now, that's the arachnoid mater. So the dura mater is on the outside, and the arachnoid mater is smushed right up against it. Dura mater means tough mother. It's the membrane that's responsible really for keeping all the fluid in. The arachnoid mater pressed up against it means spidery mother. And it's because the arachnoid mater actually has little projections that stick out to help drain the cerebral spinal fluid out of your body at its proper rate. So we have dura mater, where the 9, subdural space, this brown line running around, and then arachnoid mater just inside the subdural space. Does that make sense? We're buying it? This hand here is the dura mater. So we see that's where the 9 is. Boom. This hand here is the arachnoid mater. There's a space between them, but it's a really small space, isn't it? So that's the idea. That brown line is the space between my hands.
Well, what's that big gully? Like underneath 9? Between 32 and 9? Gully.
Gully? Oh, that's the subarachnoid space, which we haven't talked about yet. So we have the dura mater, the subdural space, the arachnoid mater, the subarachnoid space. It's big. You can see my whole pen wedges into that subarachnoid space. And finally, sitting on the spinal cord itself is the pia mater, which means gentle or delicate or loving mother, depending on how you translate it. So that's the pia mater sitting right on the spinal cord itself. So dura mater, subdural space, arachnoid mater, subarachnoid space, pia mater. The only one I left off your list is this yellow fatty stuff out here. That's your epidural space. So one day, should you decide you wish to wisely avoid the pains of childbirth, they will bend you way forward and shove a needle into that fatty tissue right there. And they do it just below your L2 vertebrae.
I don't know how they figure that out.
What's this?
It's crazy how they figure, like,